My husband threw my suitcase onto the wet pavement and laughed, thinking he had stripped me of every dime. He believed I was finished, but he did not know about the faded plastic card in my pocket, the one my grandmother left me years ago. I stood shivering before the bank scanner, expecting rejection, until the screen flashed two words that changed everything. Access granted. The lock clicked open, not just for money, but for the truth that would destroy him. My name is Megan Hart, and 10 minutes ago, I was a wife standing in the comfort of my own kitchen. Now, I was nothing more than a trespasser on my own front porch. The heavy click of the deadbolt sliding into place sounded like a gunshot in the quiet, manicured silence of Granton, Pennsylvania. My suitcase landed on the wet concrete with a dull thud, followed by a garment bag that Caleb had not even bothered to zip closed. My clothes spilled out onto the dirty welcome mat, soaking up the freezing rain. The front door cracked open one last time. Caleb Vance stood there, framed by the warm golden light of the hallway. He did not look angry. He did not look sad. He looked bored, like he was taking out the trash on a Tuesday night. He extended a hand holding a single, crisp sheet of paper. "Take it," Caleb said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "It is a generous settlement. Consider it an expedited divorce." I stared at him, water dripping from my eyelashes and blurring my vision. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely feel my fingers. "Caleb, what are you doing?" I managed to choke out. "It is midnight. You cannot just lock me out. You violated the terms of our financial agreement." "Megan," he said, smoothing the cuff of his shirt. "I spoke to the bank an hour ago. The joint accounts are closed effective immediately due to suspicious activity." "Your activity? I suggest you sign that and find a hotel." "Suspicious activity," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I deposit my paycheck into that account. I pay the mortgage, not anymore," he replied. Then he closed the door. I stood there as the rain began to fall harder, turning the expensive landscaping into mud. I felt the burn of eyes on me. Mrs. Gable next door was watching from behind her blinds. I saw the slats move. I was a spectacle. I was a cheap drama for the neighbors to discuss over their morning coffee. I pulled out my phone to call for help. The screen flashed bright white. Password incorrect. My heart hammered against my ribs. I typed it again. Carefully. Password incorrect. Then the notifications started rolling in at the top of the screen, one after another. Security alert password changed for main email. Security alert recovery phone number updated. Then, silence. The screen went dark. He was not just kicking me out, he was deleting me. I had one shot before the service was cut completely. I dialed Dana Weller. It rang twice. Through the living room window, I saw Caleb walk to the liquor cabinet. He poured himself a glass of whiskey. He was laughing. He picked up his phone, probably texting the woman whose name I had seen but ignored for too long. Megan Dana answered, her voice thick with sleep. "It is late. Is everything okay?" He threw me out. "Dana," I whispered, watching my husband toast the empty room. He changed the locks. He took everything. Inside the house. Caleb raised his glass in a mock toast toward the window. He knew I was watching. He wanted me to see him celebrate. I hung up and huddled under the small overhang of the porch, trying to shield myself from the biting wind. I opened my wallet to assess the damage. It was pathetic. I had my driver's license, a coffee punch card that was one stamp away from a free latte, and 3 single-dollar bills. Then my fingers brushed against a piece of plastic in the hidden slot behind my ID. It was old, the edges fraying and the silver lettering faded. Evelyn Hart, my grandmother. I had carried it for 6 years since she passed, never once thinking to use it. It was just a keepsake, a piece of junk I could not bring myself to throw away. I looked at it, ready to toss it into the puddle at my feet. What good was a dead woman's card against a husband who had just stolen my life? Then her voice echoed in my head, sharp and clear, cutting through the sound of the rain. "Megan, Listen to me, she had said during her final days in the hospital, her grip surprisingly strong on my wrist. When the world backs you into a corner, do not look for a door. Look for a key. I gripped the card until the plastic dug into my palm. Caleb thought he had won. He thought I was just a naive wife who would disappear into the night, crushed by the weight of his betrayal. I wiped the rain from my face. I would not disappear. I would survive tonight, and tomorrow. I would find out exactly what this key opened. For 5 years, our marriage was a masterclass in public relations. To the outside world, Caleb and I were the definition of success. His social media feed was a carefully curated gallery of charity galas, weekend vineyard tours, and captions about how lucky he was to have a supportive wife. But inside that house, the air was always thin, like I was living in a high-altitude chamber where oxygen was rationed. Caleb did not just want a subordinate. He wanted a subordinate. I blamed myself for letting it happen. It was a slow erosion, not a landslide. It started with the small things. He would sigh when I opened a bank statement, taking the paper from my hands with a gentle, patronizing smile. "Megan, honey, you know numbers stress you out," he would say, his voice dripping with faux concern. "You are brilliant at your job, but you do not have the headspace for finance. Let me carry that burden for us." It sounded so noble back then. I was the operations manager at Northbridge Clinical Solutions. I managed complex logistics and 6-figure departmental budgets every day. I was not incompetent. Yet. Somehow. Caleb convinced me that my personal finances were a different beast, a monster only he could tame. I brought home a substantial salary, yet my personal checking account always hovered at just enough to cover groceries and gas. Whenever I asked why our savings did not seem to grow despite our combined income, he would inundate me with jargon about diversified portfolios and long-term yield caps until my eyes glazed over. The trap snapped shut 3 years ago, over a glass of red wine on a Tuesday evening. He slid a document across the granite island. "It is just a convenience power of attorney." "Meg," he had said, uncorking the bottle. "If something happens to me, or if I am traveling for business and we need to move funds for an investment, you will be stuck if we do not have this. It is just standard procedure for couples with our asset class." I signed it. I signed away my autonomy with a ballpoint pen, thinking I was securing our future. The cracks in his facade appeared, but I was too trained to see them. 6 months ago, I saw an email notification on his tablet that he had left unlocked. It was an alert from our primary bank, stating that all correspondence was being auto-forwarded to an address I did not recognize. When I confronted him, he laughed it off without looking up from his phone. "It is just a system glitch." "Megan," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "The bank upgraded their server security. I am handling it. Why are you always looking for problems?" Then came the papers for debt restructuring. He woke me up at 11 at night, claiming the notary was coming early the next morning and he needed my signature to lower our interest rates. I was groggy, trusting, and stupid. I signed 3 places he pointed to, never reading the fine print that likely authorized him to leverage my credit against his bad bets. And then there was the name. I was coming down the stairs 2 months ago, stepping softly in my socks, when I heard him whispering in the study. The door was ajar. "Sloan, look, I told you the liquidity is coming," he hissed into the phone. "She is clueless. Just wait until the quarter ends." When I walked in, he slammed the phone down. "Who is Sloan?" I asked, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "A colleague," he snapped, his face flushing red. "She is a consultant on the new development project. Very aggressive. Stop eavesdropping, Megan. It is unbecoming. Sloan Mercer." I had Googled her name that night and found a LinkedIn profile for a financial analyst, but I forced myself to believe him. I wanted to believe the lie because the truth was too terrifying to confront. Sitting in Dana's guest room, shivering in dry clothes that did not fit me, the full picture finally came into focus. Caleb did not just have an affair. He did not just fall out of love. This was not a crime of passion. It was a heist. He had spent 5 years building a cage, convincing me it was a castle, and systematically stripping me of every resource I had. He had not just planned to leave me. He had planned to erase me. The next morning, the reality of my erasure hit me with the brutality of a physical blow. I stood in front of an ATM 3 blocks from Dana's apartment, shielding the screen from the morning glare. I punched in my PIN, my fingers trembling slightly. The machine whirred, paused, and then flashed a message in red block letters, "Transaction declined." I stared at it, blinking against the harsh light. I tried again. Same result. Panic began to rise in my throat like bile. I pulled out my phone, which was only working because Dana had let me tether to her hotspot, and opened my banking app. I expected to see a zero balance. I expected to see a negative number. I did not expect to see the screen that greeted me, "User not found." It was not just empty. It was gone. 20 minutes later, I was standing at the counter of our main branch, gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. The teller, a woman I had exchanged pleasantries with for 3 years, refused to meet my eyes. She looked at her monitor, then at me, then back at the monitor. I am so sorry. Mrs. Vance, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But the records show you came in yesterday. Well, not in person. The request was processed through the Priority Client portal. You requested a full consolidation and closure of the accounts. I was at work yesterday, I argued, my voice rising. Check the security cameras. Check the signature logs. I did not authorize this. The authorization was verified through 2-step mobile authentication and your voice security phrase, she replied, finally looking at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. The system records are complete. If you want to contest this, you will need to file a formal fraud claim with the headquarters. The investigation takes 60 to 90 days. 90 days, I choked out. I have $12 to my name. I really cannot help you, she said, stepping back. Please, do not make a scene. I walked out of the bank feeling like a ghost. I sat on a damp bench and used Dana's phone to call a legal aid hotline. I waited on hold for 40 minutes. When a junior lawyer finally answered, I spilled everything in a rush: the lockout, the empty accounts, the deception. He listened, and then he asked the one question that sealed my coffin. Ma'am, did you at any point sign a durable power of attorney granting him control over assets? Yes, I whispered, but for emergencies. Not for this. Legally. Unless you can prove he acted against a specific fiduciary duty that wasn't covered in the fine print. He acted as your agent, the lawyer said, his tone dry. You gave him the keys. Getting them back is a civil matter. It will take months and a retainer of at least $5,000 to start. I hung up. I had no money for a retainer. I had no money for lunch. Desperation drove me back to the house. I needed my birth certificate. I needed my passport. I stood on the porch where I had been thrown out the night before and pounded on the door. The curtains did not move. The house was silent, a fortress of brick and stone that I had paid for. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Caleb. Stop pounding on the door. You are disturbing the peace. Everything inside is marital property under dispute. If you do not leave, I will call the police and tell them you are having a mental health crisis. Do not make me get a restraining order. Megan, for your own good. I stared at the screen. He was rewriting the narrative in real time. If I screamed, I was crazy. If I fought, I was violent. If I stayed, I was a trespasser. I retreated. I had no choice. Back at Dana's apartment, I sat on the floor of the guest room, surrounded by the meager possessions I had managed to salvage over the years in a memory box. I kept at her place a habit from my childhood when my parents moved us around too much. I dug through it, looking for anything I could sell or use. There was my original birth certificate, some photos of me and Dana from college, and a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was a birthday card from my grandmother, Evelyn Hart, given to me 2 weeks before she died. I had never opened the inner envelope because I was too grief-stricken at the time, and then life with Caleb had swept me away. I tore open the seal. There was no money inside. There was just a small index card with her distinctive, spidery handwriting, swipe card at the old spot. I froze. My hand went to my pocket, pulling out the faded plastic card I had almost thrown in the puddle the night before. I looked at the card, then at the note. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold rain went down my spine. Grandma Evelyn had not just left me a keepsake. She had left me a directive. She knew, somehow, years ago. She knew I would end up here, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a door slammed in my face. Why I whispered to the empty room. Why did you know I would need this? I did not have the answer. But for the first time in 24 hours, I had a direction. Caleb thought he had checkmated me. He thought the game was over because he controlled the board. He did not realize my grandmother had set up a completely different game, on a board he did not even know existed. The old spot was not a metaphor. It was a physical place, rooted in the sticky sweet memories of my childhood lollipops and the smell of floor wax. I drove Dana's car 45 minutes north to Harlow Ridge, a sleepy town that time seemed to have forgotten. Pulling up in front of the First Heritage Bank, it was a brick fortress that looked exactly as it had 20 years ago when my grandmother used to drag me here on her errands. I walked inside, the silence of the lobby hitting me like a physical weight. I approached the teller, a young man who looked like he was barely out of high school, and slid the faded plastic card across the marble counter. My hands were trembling, but I tried to keep my face like stone. I need to access whatever this connects to, I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. The teller picked up the card, turning it over in his hands. He frowned. "Ma'am, this is not a debit card," he said, looking confused. "The magnetic strip is thicker. This looks like an old security clearance key. We haven't issued these in a decade. Just swipe it," I urged him. "Please." He sighed, skepticism written all over his face, but he slid the card through the reader on his terminal. The machine beeped a sharp, piercing sound that made me jump. The screen facing him flashed red, then settled on a steady green block of text. I leaned over to read it, my breath catching in my throat. "Access granted safe deposit box 117, box 117. The teller read aloud, his eyes widening. That is in the old vault. That section is mostly dormant." He called for the branch manager. A stern woman in a gray suit approached, her heels clicking rhythmically on the tile. I produced the paperwork before she could ask my birth certificate, my driver's license, and the death certificate for Evelyn Hart. She took them, adjusting her glasses, and typed something into her computer. "The box is leased in perpetuity," the manager said, looking up at me with a strange expression. The access protocols were flagged as legacy hold. It means the owner prepaid for 50 years and set a strict condition that no access was permitted until a specific security card was presented physically. We were not even allowed to drill it if the keys were lost. She led me into the vault. The air inside was cool and smelled of dust and old metal. We walked past rows of shiny new boxes to the back corner, where the metal was duller, heavier. She inserted her master key, and I inserted the key attached to the plastic card. Click. The sound was heavy, final. It sounded like the cocking of a gun. The manager slid the long metal drawer out and placed it on the viewing table, then left me alone in the privacy booth. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I expected cash. I prayed for cash. I needed a stack of bills to get a hotel, to hire a lawyer, to breathe. I lifted the lid. There was no money. The box was almost empty. Sitting in the center of the cold metal floor was a black USB drive, a worn leather-bound notebook, a thick envelope sealed with red wax, and a small silver key with the word "heart" engraved on the bow. I felt a wave of nausea. I could not pay a retainer with a USB drive. I sank into the chair, tears pricking my eyes, and reached for the notebook. I opened the cover. My grandmother's handwriting was there, but it wasn't the shaky scrawl of her final years. It was firm, sharp, and deliberate. Megan, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means you have been pushed out of your own life. I turned the page. It was not a diary. It was a ledger. Page after page was filled with columns of data, dates, company names, dollar amounts written in the hundreds of thousands, and names. One name appeared over and over again, circled in red ink that looked like blood on the page. Caleb Vance. The entries went back 7 years, 2 years before I even met him. August 14th, 2016 subject initiates contact with target at Charity Gala. Setup confirmed. September 2nd, 2016 background check reveals. Subject has 3 prior aliases. Debts totaling $400,000 hidden in shell companies. I froze. She had been watching him. She had been watching him before I even knew he existed. I flipped to a page dated 3 months before our wedding. The handwriting pressed hard into the paper, the pen nearly tearing through. Investigation confirms motive. He is not looking for a wife. He is looking for a host. He needs a clean credit profile to wash the debt. And then, at the bottom of the page, written in capital letters that seemed to scream at me from the grave, "He did not marry you for love." I dropped the notebook. The silence of the vault was deafening. My grandmother had not left me a life raft. She hadn't left me money to run away. She had left me a weapon. This was not an inheritance. This was a war map. And I was finally ready to fight. Dana's contact, Miles Kerr, operated out of a basement studio that hummed with the sound of cooling fans and smelled faintly of ozone. He was a man of few words, which I appreciated. I handed him the USB drive from the safety deposit box, and he plugged it into a terrifyingly complex-looking tower. For 5 minutes, the only sound was the clicking of his keyboard. Then, he leaned back and whistled low. "This is not just data," Miles said, pointing at the screen. "This is a forensic snapshot. Every file here has a blockchain timestamp. That means it cannot be argued in court. Whoever put this together knew exactly how to make it stick. It proves the documents existed in this state years ago." He opened the first folder. It was a digital slaughterhouse of my marriage. I watched, horrified, as files popped up showing credit lines opened in my name, credit lines I had never seen. There were loans for $50,000, $75,000, all approved using the power of attorney I had signed, but the money did not go into our home or our life. It was immediately funneled into a company called Vance Meridian LLC. "He was leveraging you," Miles explained, his voice devoid of pity. "Just stating facts. He used his credit to start the fires, and he used your credit to buy the gasoline. If the business goes under, the debt is structured to land on your Social Security number, not his." Then came the folder labeled Mercer. I expected love letters. I expected photos. Instead, I found corporate filings. Sloan Mercer was listed as the interim chief financial officer for a development project in Arizona, a project that, according to the attached emails, did not actually exist. She was approving invoices for consulting fees that were being paid directly to Caleb's offshore accounts. "She is not just his girlfriend," I whispered, feeling the blood drain from my face. "She is his money launderer. It gets worse," Miles said. He opened a scanned document that looked older than the rest. It was a copy of a private trust agreement. My grandmother held silent shares in a private equity fund shares that had matured significantly over the last decade, and the beneficiary listed wasn't my mother or an aunt. It was me. I stared at the screen. I am rich. Technically. Yes, Miles said. But look at the access logs for the digital vault connected to this trust. He pulled up a command window with lines of red text. Someone has been trying to crack the entry code for box 117 for 18 months, Miles said, tapping the glass. Failed attempt. Failed attempt. Failed attempt. The system locked them out because they did not have the physical key card. They knew the money was there. Megan. They just could not get to it. The realization hit me so hard I had to grab the edge of the desk. Caleb did not throw me out because he was tired of me. He threw me out because he was desperate. He knew about the trust. He knew about the box. He had been trying to steal it for a year and a half, and my grandmother's old-school security measure, a piece of plastic I kept in my wallet, was the only thing stopping him. He had stripped me of my own money to force me into poverty, hoping I would be too weak to fight when he finally found a way to crack the safe. He was afraid, I said, my voice trembling with rage. He was terrified I would find out. I took the drive and the analysis to Tessa Lang, a civil litigation attorney who had a reputation for being a shark in a silk blouse. She sat in her glass-walled office, reviewing the printouts Miles had prepared, while a forensic accountant named Mr. Vane sat silently in the corner, nodding as he turned the pages. After an hour, Tessa took off her glasses and looked at me. Megan, she said, her voice steady and serious. This is not a divorce case anymore. This is a RICO case wrapped in a marriage license. We have him on fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. We have a path. And we are going to burn his house down with it. I felt a breath leave my lungs that I had been holding for 2 days. So, we file. We file, Tessa confirmed. First thing tomorrow morning. I left her office feeling lighter than air. The rain had stopped, and for the first time, the city didn't look like a trap. It looked like a battlefield I could win. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, a man in a windbreaker stepped in front of me. Megan Vance, he asked. Hart, I corrected him instinctively. Megan Hart. I have a delivery for Megan Vance, he said, thrusting a thick envelope into my chest. You have been served. I tore open the packet right there on the street. It was a lawsuit. Caleb was suing me. Plaintiff, Caleb Vance. Defendant, Megan Vance. Cause of action, theft of property. Misappropriation of trade secrets. He was claiming that the papers I had taken from the house, the very evidence of his crimes, were proprietary business documents and that I had stolen them to commit corporate espionage. I stood on the sidewalk, holding the summons. He had struck first. He was trying to bury me in legal fees before I could even open my mouth. He really thinks he can scare me, I said to the empty street, gripping the papers until they crinkled. He has no idea what I am holding. I did not cry. I put the lawsuit in my bag, right next to the USB drive that would destroy him, and started walking. The war had officially begun. Caleb walked into the courtroom wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. He looked impeccable, the very image of a grieving, betrayed husband. He did not look at me. He looked at the judge with a practiced expression of weary patience, as if my very existence was a burden he was heroically trying to shoulder. He was confident. Why wouldn't he be in his mind? I was the destitute ex-wife living on a friend's couch, and he was the pillar of the community. His lawyer, a man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, wasted no time painting me as a villain. Your Honor, we are dealing with a woman who is currently unstable, the lawyer said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. Mrs. Vance has removed confidential proprietary documents from the marital home in a fit of vindictiveness. She has no assets, no residence, and is acting out of desperation to secure a settlement she does not deserve. We are simply asking for the return of Mr. Vance's property and a restraining order to prevent further harassment. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the judge about the empty accounts, the locks changed in the rain, the sheer cruelty of it all. But Tessa Lang, my attorney, placed a cool hand on my arm. She did not stand up to argue my sanity. She stood up to argue the math. "Your Honor," Tessa said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "We are not here to debate my client's emotional state. We are here to discuss the provenance of the assets in question. We are filing an emergency motion to preserve all digital banking logs, specifically regarding the change of authentication protocols on the joint accounts that occurred 48 hours ago." Caleb's lawyer scoffed. "This is a fishing expedition." "It is a fraud investigation," Tessa corrected him sharply. "We have preliminary forensic evidence suggesting that the plaintiff used Mrs. Vance's identity to secure high-risk loans without her consent. If those logs are deleted, as is standard protocol after 30 days, the evidence of a felony disappears. We request an immediate preservation order." The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at Caleb. "Mr. Vance, if these accounts are legitimate, you have nothing to fear from a data freeze." Motion granted. Caleb stiffened. It was a microscopic movement, a tightening of the jaw. But I saw it. For a second, the mask slipped, but then he smiled a cold, terrifying smile that did not reach his eyes. He nodded at the judge as if he had won a prize. He was not scared. He still thought he had an ace up his sleeve that we could not see. As the bailiff dismissed us, I hurried into the hallway, my heart pounding. I needed air. But before I could reach the exit, a hand shot out and grabbed my elbow. It was Sloane Mercer. Up close. She did not look like the glamorous executive I had seen in photos. Her makeup was a little too heavy, covering dark circles under her eyes, and her hand was trembling. "Let go of me," I hissed, pulling my arm away. You do not understand what you are doing," Sloane whispered, looking over her shoulder at the courtroom doors where Caleb was shaking hands with his lawyer. "He is not just a liar, Megan. He is dangerous. If you push him into a corner, he will not just ruin you, he will end you. He already tried." I replied, "Tell your boyfriend I am not afraid of him." "He is not my boyfriend," she said, her voice cracking. "He is my employer. And if he goes down, he takes everyone with him." She shoved a small card into my hand and walked away quickly, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble floor. I looked down at the card. It was heavy stock, completely blank except for a single letter embossed in the center, AH. I turned it over. In hasty, smeared ink, someone had written, "If you want to know who pays his debts, unlock heart." I drove back to Dana's apartment with my mind racing. Unlock heart. I ran into the guest room and pulled out the metal safety deposit box key I had retrieved from the bank, the one engraved with the word heart. I had assumed it was just a label, but then I looked at the pile of my grandmother's old belongings I had salvaged from the house years ago, sitting in the corner of the room. Among them was a heavy, gray steel file box that I had never been able to open. It had belonged to my grandfather, and after he died, my grandmother had kept it sealed. I dragged the box to the center of the room. I inserted the small silver key into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a stiff clunk, the latch released. Inside, there were no financial documents. There was only a single sheet of yellowed legal paper with my grandmother's handwriting, dated 3 years before she died. "Megan, if you are opening this, you have found the key in the vault. That means you are fighting him." I read the next line, and my blood ran cold. "Do not trust the Mercer woman. She is weak, and she is complicit, but use her fear. She knows where the bodies are buried because she helped dig the graves. She is your witness, not your friend." I sat back on my heels, the letter shaking in my hand. My grandmother had known about Sloane Mercer years ago. She had known everything. This was not just a battle between a husband and a wife. It was a web, a complex network of lies that had been spinning around me for a decade, and my grandmother had left me the scissors to cut right through the center of it. The war moved from the courtroom to my pocket. By Wednesday morning, my phone had become a radioactive brick. Caleb launched a scorched earth campaign across social media, painting himself as the martyr of a failed marriage. Mutual friends I had known for 5 years began blocking me. Then came the anonymous accounts on Twitter and Instagram, spouting detailed, fabricated stories about my alleged infidelity and how I had supposedly sabotaged Caleb's business deals out of spite. I sat in Tessa's conference room, watching a fresh notification pop up from a user named TruthSeeker88 claiming I had a gambling addiction. He is destroying my reputation. Tessa, I said, my voice rising in panic. If HR at Northbridge sees this, I could lose my job. I need to post a statement. I need to defend myself. Tessa snatched the phone from my hand and placed it face down on the table. No, she said firmly. We do not argue in the comments section. Megan, that is what he wants. He wants you emotional and sloppy. We argue in the filings. Silence is loud. Let him scream into the void while we load the gun. And we were loading it. Mr. Vane, the forensic accountant, projected a spreadsheet onto the wall. It showed a spiderweb of transactions linked to Vance Meridian LLC. He got lazy, Mr. Vane said, pointing to a column of dates. He used your digital signature to authorize 3 short-term bridge loans totaling $150,000. But look at the IP address stamps. You were in a mandatory on-site compliance seminar in Chicago when 2 of these were signed, unless you can teleport. You did not sign these. Miles, sitting in the corner with his laptop, chimed in. I also found an email chain from the night he kicked you out. He contacted a digital reputation management firm. He asked for a quote on total history scrubbing and asset masking. He knew he was crossing a legal line, and he tried to hire a janitor to clean up the crime scene before the body was even cold. The evidence was mounting, but the emotional toll was heavy. I felt isolated in the city I had called home. That evening, however, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, expecting another harasser, but something made me answer. Mrs. Vance, a brittle, elderly voice asked. It is Martha Callow, from next door. Mrs. Callow had been our neighbor for 4 years. She was a stern woman who complained if our trash cans were out an hour too long. I expected a lecture. Mrs. Callow, I said, bracing myself. I do not live there anymore. If Caleb is making noise, you have to call him. I know you do not live there, she said, her voice unusually soft. I saw what happened. I have a doorbell camera, you know. I saw him throw your things in the mud. I saw him lock the door while you were crying. I held my breath. I heard the lies he is telling people at the club, she continued. He says you abandoned him. I do not like bullies, Megan. I have the video file saved. I sent it to your email. I burst into tears right there in Dana's kitchen. The video was grainy, but it clearly showed Caleb shoving me out and smiling as he slammed the door. It was proof of illegal eviction and emotional abuse. The next morning brought an even bigger shock. Tessa received an encrypted email from an anonymous sender. The subject line was simply, insurance. Attached were internal memos from the development project Caleb was running. They detailed a plan to shift $2 million of missing funds into accounts labeled with my maiden name. This is from Sloan, I said, staring at the screen. It has to be. She is flipping, Tessa said, a grim smile touching her lips. She realizes the ship is sinking. Caleb promised to marry her, but these documents show he is planning to flee the country and leave her to explain the missing money to the investors. She is not helping you because she is good, Megan. She is helping you because she is terrified. We had him. We had the fraud, the fake loans, the eviction footage, and the embezzlement scheme. I felt a surge of triumph. I was ready to watch him crumble. But at 4 o'clock that afternoon, a fax rolled into Tessa's machine. She read it, and her face went pale. What is it I asked? He just filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, Tessa said, dropping the paper on the desk. Bankruptcy, I asked? Confused. But he has money. He stole my money. He is claiming total insolvency, Tessa explained, her voice tight. He is saying the business failed. His assets are 0. And the debts, including the ones he put in your name, are unpayable losses. He is trying to trigger an automatic stay. It freezes our lawsuit. He wants to wash his hands of everything, call it a financial accident, and walk away, leaving you with the wreckage. I looked at the paper. Caleb was not just fighting back, he was trying to burn the whole board so that nobody won. He thought bankruptcy would shield him from the consequences of his theft. He thinks this is a shield, I said, standing up. He thinks he can just declare himself broke and the law will protect him. I remembered my grandmother's notebook. I remembered the ledger. He is wrong. I said, bankruptcy protects you from bad luck. It does not protect you from fraud. The pages of the notebook smelled like lavender and old paper. I sat on the floor of the guest room, flipping past the pages I had already skimmed in the bank vault, the lists of Caleb's debts, the proof that he saw me as a host rather than a wife. I already knew he was a monster. What I didn't understand was why she had let it happen. I stopped at an entry dated 6 months before my wedding. I needed to understand her endgame. Why didn't you stop me? I whispered to the empty room, tears blurring my vision. I turned the page and found her answer, as if she were speaking to me from beyond the grave. I could not stop you, Megan. You were in love, and you are stubborn, just like I was. If I fought him openly, I would lose you. He would have isolated you sooner, so I let you marry him. But I made sure he could never marry your safety. I looked at the faded plastic card lying on the carpet. For years, I had thought it was just a piece of sentimental junk, a useless library card, or an expired membership she wanted me to keep as a memento. I realized now that was the point. She had deliberately made it look worthless. She knew that if she gave me a shiny gold key or a checkbook, Caleb would have found it. He would have bullied or charmed me into signing it over to him during one of our financial restructuring talks. She had hidden the key to my survival in the one place Caleb would never look a piece of trash in an old wallet. I reached for the sealed envelope from the deposit box. My hands shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside was a legal document titled The Hart Legacy Trust. It was not a fortune for buying yachts or mansions. It was a conditional trust. The terms were specific. Funds are to be released only upon proof of financial duress or marital dissolution. Specifically to be used for the retention of legal counsel, forensic accounting services, and personal security. She hadn't left me lottery money. She had left me a war chest. She had prepaid for the army I needed to fight the war she knew was coming. You knew I would need to fight him, I said, clutching the paper to my chest. You knew I could do it. I cried then, hot tears that felt different from the despair of the last few days. I wasn't crying because I was rich. I was crying because for the first time in 5 years, I remembered what it felt like to be valued. Caleb had spent our entire marriage making me feel small, incapable, and dependent. My grandmother had spent her final years betting on my strength, but the moment of peace was shattered by the vibration of my phone. It was Miles. Megan, pick up, he said, his voice urgent. I have a hit on the credit monitoring. He is trying to make a final withdrawal. What do you mean? I asked, wiping my face. He just booked a flight. Miles said fast. One way. Grand Cayman, departing tomorrow morning at 6, and he is trying to wire the remaining liquidity from the hidden accounts using your old authorization code. He is cashing out. Megan, he is going to run. I stood up, the trust document crinkling in my fist. Caleb wasn't just bankrupt, he was fleeing the jurisdiction. He was going to leave me with the debt and disappear onto an island with whatever cash he could carry. Let him try, I said, my voice cold and steady. Call Tessa. Tell her we need to get a judge on the phone now. He thinks he is leaving the country. But I am about to cancel his trip. The atmosphere in Tessa's office was electric with the kind of tension usually reserved for bomb disposal squads. We had less than an hour. Miles was hunched over his laptop, his eyes darting across lines of code as he tracked the movement of funds in real time. He is moving fast, Miles said, his fingers flying across the keys. He is not sending it directly to the Caymans. He is routing it through a cryptocurrency middleware platform. Once it converts to digital tokens, it is gone. We are talking about $240,000 disappearing into the ether in 20 minutes. Tessa was already on the phone with the emergency duty judge, her voice sharp and authoritative. Your Honor, we are not asking for a hold on a standard marital dispute. We are witnessing active dissipation of assets in real time. We have flight logs confirming Mr. Vance has a one-way ticket booked for tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, while Tessa argued. My phone buzzed. It was the branch manager from First Heritage Bank in Harlow Ridge. Mrs. Vance, she said, sounding breathless. I thought you should know. We just had a call on the priority line. A person claiming to be you called to ask for the emergency drill procedure to force open box 117. I froze. I am in the city. I did not call you. We knew it was not you. The manager replied. The security question was answered incorrectly 3 times. But here is the thing. We record all priority calls for quality assurance. We have a voice recording of a man trying to imitate a woman, and when he got frustrated, he swore in his natural voice. It sounds like your husband. I looked at Tessa and held up the phone. We have him on tape impersonating me. 10 minutes later. The judge signed the order. It was a temporary restraining order on all financial movements and, crucially, an order for Caleb to surrender his passport to the court-martial immediately. Then, my phone rang again. The screen flashed. Caleb! I put it on speaker. The room went silent. Megan. His voice was smooth, dripping with that fake, syrupy concern that used to fool me. Look, this has all gotten out of hand. Lawyers, judges. It is expensive. It is wasteful. We are adults. Can we just meet? I want to give you a settlement check. No courts. Just us. He was scared. The frozen accounts had spooked him. Starbucks on 4th Avenue, I said, my voice steady. In 30 minutes. Perfect, he said, sounding relieved. I knew you were reasonable. I walked into the coffee shop with Tessa right behind me, though she sat at a separate table, her phone recording audio. Caleb was waiting in a corner booth. He looked tired. His tie was loose, and he was tapping his foot nervously. When he saw me, he stood up and tried to hug me. I stepped back. Sit down. Caleb, I said. He sat, flashing a tight, winning smile that didn't reach his eyes. I have a check here for $50,000, he said, sliding an envelope across the table. It is enough to get you an apartment. Maybe start fresh. All you have to do is sign a waiver dropping the lawsuit. $50,000, I asked, looking at the envelope without touching it. You stole $300,000 from the equity line alone. That was business debt. Megan, he insisted, leaning in, his eyes wide with feigned sincerity. I was trying to save our future. You were always so anxious about money. I handled it to protect you. You handled it by locking me out of my own bank app, I asked, baiting the trap. You changed the 2-factor authentication to your phone number. Caleb, that is a felony. He waved his hand dismissively. I did not do it to hurt you. I just changed the security number to mine for convenience. You never check the codes anyway. I was just simplifying the administrative work. Gotcha. From the table behind us, Tessa made a small hand signal. He had just admitted on record to unauthorized access of a protected computer system. Before I could answer, the bell above the door chimed. Sloane Mercer walked in. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She marched straight to our table and threw a heavy silver USB drive onto the wood surface. It landed with a loud clatter that made Caleb jump. Sloane. Caleb stammered, his face draining of color. What are you doing here? I am done. Caleb, she said, her voice shaking but loud enough for the whole shop to hear. I am not going to prison for you. She looked at me. That drive contains the original contract for the shell company. He signed it, and there are emails from last week where he instructed me to modify the metadata to make it look like you were the signatory. Caleb stared at the drive, then at me. The realization washed over him. He was not the smartest person in the room anymore. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "This is a setup!" he snarled. "I am leaving!" He turned to the door, but two large men in uniform were already blocking the exit. One of them stepped forward, holding a piece of paper. "Caleb Vance," the officer asked. "We have a court order for the immediate surrender of your passport and a summons for an emergency hearing regarding dissipation of assets." Caleb looked back at me. I was still sitting, my hands folded calmly on the table, right next to the envelope of hush money he had tried to buy me off with. You did this," he whispered, looking at me like he had never seen me before. "No, Caleb," I said softly. "You did this. I just turned on the lights." The final hearing was not the quiet, administrative procedure Caleb had hoped for. He sat at the defense table, leaning back in his chair, confident that his bankruptcy filing was a bulletproof vest. He believed that by declaring himself broke, he could wash away the theft of my life savings as a mere business loss. But Tessa Lang did not bring a knife to a gunfight. She brought a cannon. "Your Honor," Tessa began, her voice filling the silence of the courtroom. "Mr. Vance is attempting to use Chapter 7 bankruptcy to discharge debts incurred through fraud and identity theft. Under federal law, debts obtained under false pretenses are non-dischargeable, and we have the map to prove it." Mr. Vane, the forensic accountant, stood up. He displayed a projection of the financial spiderweb. It was a complex diagram of shell companies, bridge loans, and email forwards. But Mr. Vane drew a single thick red line through all of them. Every single unauthorized loan, every transfer from Mrs. Vance's retirement fund, and every altered security protocol traces back to one IP address. "Mr. Vane stated, "It traces back to the laptop currently sitting in the defendant's briefcase." Caleb's lawyer scrambled to object, launching a character attack instead of a legal defense. "Mrs. Vance is simply a scorned woman looking for a payout," he argued loudly. "She is vindictive because the marriage failed, and she is trying to squeeze water from a stone." Tessa walked calmly to the bench and placed the Hart Legacy Trust document on the judge's desk. "My client is the sole beneficiary of a trust valued in the mid-7 figures, Tessa said, and I saw Caleb's eyes bulge. She did not need to steal Mr. Vance's money. She did not even touch her own inheritance until Mr. Vance stripped her of her basic human needs. She only activated this trust when she was left homeless. The room went deadly quiet. Caleb looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine shock. He realized he had been stealing pennies from a woman who was sitting on a gold mine she had refused to touch out of principle. Then came the final nail. Tessa played the audio recording from the bank, the one where a man tried to mimic my voice and failed, followed by Caleb's distinct curse word. We matched it with the log of his admission in the coffee shop about changing my security codes. The judge listened, his face hardening like concrete. He looked over his glasses at Caleb. "The court finds that the debts listed were incurred through malicious and fraudulent activity." The judge ruled, "The bankruptcy motion is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, due to the overwhelming evidence of wire fraud and identity theft, I am referring this entire evidentiary record to the State Financial Crimes Division." Panic seized Caleb. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He pointed a shaking finger at Sloane, who was sitting in the back row. It was her. Caleb shouted, his composure shattering. Sloane set up the accounts. "She is the CFO. I just signed what she gave me." Sloane stood up slowly. She did not look scared anymore. She looked like a woman who had nothing left to lose. "You taught me how to do it, Caleb," Sloane said, her voice cold enough to freeze the air in the room. "But you forgot to teach me how to die for you." The gavel banged, sealing the end of Caleb's life as he knew it. The civil judgment was absolute, full restitution of all assets, punitive damages for emotional distress, and a permanent restraining order. My bank accounts were to be restored immediately under the Victim Protection Protocol. As the judge adjourned, 2 officers from the sheriff's department entered the room. They were not there for court security. They walked straight to the defense table. "Caleb Vance," one officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of first-degree fraud and grand larceny." Caleb froze as the metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. He looked back at me over his shoulder as they led him away. His eyes were wide, filled with disbelief that the wife he had silenced for 5 years was the one watching him leave in chains. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just watched him disappear through the side door. I walked out of the courthouse and stood on the wide stone steps. The sun was shining, warm against my face. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the old, faded plastic card my grandmother had left me. Caleb thought he had thrown me out into the cold with nothing. He was wrong. He had thrown me exactly where my grandmother wanted me to land. She had drawn the map, and he had pushed me right to the starting line. He thought he could erase me with paperwork and lies. He did not understand that I was a heart, and, in the end, the paper he used to destroy me became the paper I used to bury him. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Caleb's downfall. Don't forget to subscribe to Victoria Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people.